Good morning, everybody. I don't know if that recorded. Good morning, everyone. So the first thing I wanted to do, here's our agenda for this lecture. I want to remind you, you have discussion boards to do. A lot of you have not posted on the discussion boards. Please do so as soon as possible. I am going to begin grading them. If they are not the word requirement, if they are not answering every part of the discussion board, you'll have points taken off. They're not very difficult, and the discussion boards are mostly what your grade will be throughout the rest of the semester. So please take them seriously, and I will go over today's discussion board in this recording. Okay, the next thing we're going to do today is review terms for the course. A couple of you did post in that discussion board where you were supposed to review course content terms that you had from your notes, because we will need those for the remainder of the semester. Number 3, I'm going to read the Barbara Ehrenreich essay to you from the textbook. So if you do not have the textbook, you can listen and take notes. It's pretty short, so I think it will be fine for you to listen and take notes. Then we're going to talk about comparing arguments, types of claims, structure of arguments, tools that we use. I'm going to go over the discussion board on Ehrenreich and Martinez, which is about binaries of thought. And then we're going to talk about building argument for particular audiences. And we're going to talk about how do we identify audiences, okay? All right, so the first thing I want to do is review some of the terms that you are going to be using in this course, okay? Remember, you have logos, ethos, pathos. Logos is going to be using common sense, facts, and statistics. Definitely going to be using evidence and research. Ethos is using your credibility, character, authority, morality to build your argument. Pathos is the emotion one, appeal to audience emotion. And then kairos, whoops, that got a little messed up there. All right. Kairos is the timing. So, look at the date of publication. Is this reading relevant to today's culture? Is it relevant to your topic? Sorry about that. My battery is dying on my computer. Okay, we're going to talk about figurative language. We're going to talk about binaries of thought, which that's what your next discussion board is about. We're going to talk about sarcasm and humor and analogies. Okay, remember, figurative language is using things like metaphor, simile, hyperbole, understatement, personification, symbolism, all of those things that we listed on the board a couple of times. And when we think of these things, they're tools. So we think of like, okay, here's a metaphor, but how is the metaphor adding to the argument or making it better? All right, binaries of thought, remember, I'm going to get my charger, so just bear with me. Binaries of thought, remember, are when two thoughts are in opposition to one another. So it doesn't mean that they are opposite completely. It just means that they are two things being put in opposition to one another by the author. So for example, when we did the Coates essay, we talked about the library versus the classroom. Now those two things are not necessarily completely opposite, but for Coates, he set them up as being in conflict with one another for him. So that's binaries of thought. Sorry about this. Oh, gosh. Okay. All right. Next thing is sarcasm and humor. How do authors use sarcasm and humor to build their argument? I know in the Martinez essay, she uses sarcasm, and you want to think about what is the significance of that and how it's used in the argument. Okay. Next thing is analogies. How are analogies used? So are there comparisons, for example, of today's historical educational period to like an educational period in the 1950s? Um, is there a comparison between teaching styles? Is there a comparison between races? So that's going to be analogies where it's not just a metaphor or a simile, it's going to be more of a detailed comparison. Okay. So those are some of the terms. It's not all of them, but you can take a screenshot or write these down. These are terms I'm expecting you to use in your discussion boards. I'm expecting you to understand them when I ask you questions about them. So please take a moment to screenshot this or write it down. Okay. All right. The next thing is I'm going to read the Ehrenreich essay for you. The Ehrenreich essay, it's Barbara Ehrenreich, is found on page 340 in the From Inquiry to Academic Writing book. I know some of you have told me you don't have access to the textbook, so I'm just going to read it to you on this live stream. Okay. So the title of her essay is Cultural Baggage, and a little bit about Barbara Ehrenreich. She is a social critic, activist, and political essayist. Her book, Nickel and Dimed on Not Getting By in America, which was published in 2001. But when we think of Kairos, the timing of reading that essay right now, like if you were interested in it, probably would be pretty good because I don't think a lot of us are going to be able to get by without some of the provisions from the government and other ways to get us through this difficult time. So let's see, she's had bestseller books in the United States. Her book, Bait and Switch, The Futile Pursuit of the American Dream in 2005, explores the shadowy world of the white-collar unemployed. So like unemployed PhDs, for example. Recent books of cultural analysis by Ehrenreich include, and there's a list of them, she's also written for Mother Jones, The Atlantic, Ms., The New Republic, Salon.com, and other publications. So why is that listed in the author bio? You know, which one of these terms would that relate to? It would relate to Barbara Ehrenreich's ethos. Like, she obviously has credibility if she's being published in the magazine in 1992. All right, so here's the essay. An acquaintance was telling me about the joys of rediscovering her ethnic and religious heritage. Quote, I know exactly what my ancestors were doing 2,000 years ago, she said, eyes gleaming with enthusiasm, and I can do the same things now. Then she leaned forward and inquired politely, and what is your ethnic background, may I ask? None, I said, that being the first word in line to get out of my mouth. Well, not none, I backtracked. Scottish, English, Irish, that was something, I supposed. Too much Irish to qualify as a WASP, too much of the hated English to warrant a Kiss Me I'm Irish button. Plus, there are a number of dead ends in the family tree due to adoptions, missing records, failing memories, and the like. I was blushing by this time. Did none mean I was rejecting my heritage out of Anglo-Celtic self-hate? Anglo-Celtic self-hate? Or was I revealing a hidden ethnic chauvinism in which the Britannically derived serve as a kind of neutral standard compared with the ethnic of others? Throughout the 1960s and 70s, I watched one group after another, African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, stand up and proudly reclaim their roots, while I just sank back ever deeper into my seat. All this excitement over ethnicity stemmed, I uneasily sensed, from a past in which their ancestors had been trampled upon by my ancestors, or at least by people who looked very much like them. So let's stop and think about Ehrenreich's ethnic identity. Think about what her feelings are towards her ethnic identity being, mostly filled with the colonizers, right? People who were taking culture away from other people. All right, back to the essay. In addition, it had begun to seem almost un-American not to have some sort of hyphen at hand, linking one to more venerable times and locales. But the truth is, I was raised with none. We had eaten ethnic foods in my childhood home, but these were all borrowed, like the pasties or Cornish meat pies my father had picked up from his fellow miners in Butte, Montana. If my mother had one rule, it was militant ecumenism in all manners of food and experience. Try new things, she would say, meaning anything from sweetbreads to clams, with an emphasis on the new. As a child, I briefly nourished a craving for tradition and roots. I immersed myself in the works of Sir Walter Scott. I pretended to believe that the bagpipe was a musical instrument. I was fascinated to learn from a grandmother that we were descended from certain Highland clans and longed for a pleated skirt and one of their distinctive tartans. But in Ivanhoe, it was the dark-eyed Jewess Rebecca I identified with, not the flaxen-haired bimbo Rowena. So this is talking about how Barbara identified with people outside of her ethnic culture, and that was confusing to her because she's not Jewish. So why is she identifying with a Jewish character versus the German character, okay, in this book? As for clans, why not call them tribes? Those bands of half-clad peasants and warriors whose idea of cuisine was stuffed sheep gut washed down with whiskey. And then there was the sting of Disraeli's remark, which I came across in my early teens, to the effect that his ancestors had been leading orderly, literate lives when my ancestors were still rampaging through the highlands, daubing themselves with blue paint. Motherhood put the screws on me, ethnicity-wise. I had hoped that by marrying a man of Eastern European Jewish ancestry, I would acquire for my descendants the ethnic genes that my own forebears so sadly lacked. So she's hoping that in motherhood, she is able to have some sort of identity to pass down to her children. At one point, I even subjected the children, her own children, to a Seder of my own design, which she's not Jewish, a Seder is Jewish, including a little talk about the flight from Egypt and its relevance to modern social issues. But the kids insisted on buttering their matzahs and snickering through my talk. Give me a break, Mom, the older one said. You don't even believe in God. So her kids could tell she was kind of trying too hard. After the tiny pagans had been put to bed, I sat down to brood over Elijah's wine. What had I been thinking? The kids knew that their Jewish grandparents were secular folks who didn't hold seders themselves. And if ethnicity eluded me, how could I expect it to take root in my children, who are not only Scottish, English, Irish, but Hungarian, Polish, Russian to boot? But then, on the fumes of Manischewitz, a great insight took form in my mind. It was true, as the kids said, that I didn't, quote, believe in God. But this could be taken as something very different from an accusation, a reminder of a genuine heritage. So what is she kind of putting up? Think about the binary here of her identity. She's kind of putting identity versus non-identity in conflict with each other, and how having a non-identity can be an identity. All right. So not believing in God can be part of your identity. Sorry, I almost just choked myself on my headphones. Okay. Let's see. My parents had not believed in God either, nor had my grandparents or any other progenitors going back to the great, great level. They had become disillusioned with Christianity generations ago. Just as on the in-law side, my children's other ancestors had shaken their Orthodox Judaism. This insight did not exactly furnish me with an identity, but it was at least something to work with. We are the kind of people, I realized, whatever our distant ancestors' religions, who do not believe, who do not carry on traditions, who do not do things just because someone has done them before. The epiphany went on. Do you know what epiphany means? Look it up. It means a realization. So she's having all these realizations about how not having a cultural identity is her identity. Okay. The epiphany went on. I recalled that my mother never introduced a procedure for cooking or cleaning by telling me, Grandma did it this way. What did Grandma know? Living in the days before vacuum cleaners and disposable toilet mops? In my parents' general view, new things were better than old, and the very fact that some ritual had been performed in the past was a good reason for abandoning it now. Because what was the past, as our forebears knew it? Nothing but poverty, superstition, and grief. Think for yourself, Dad used to say. Always ask why. In fact, this may have been the ideal cultural heritage for my particular ethnic strain, bounced as it was from the highlands of Scotland, across the sea, out to the Rockies, down into the mines, and finally spewed out into high-tech suburban America. So she does identify kind of a line of identity of ancestors and how now she's just in suburban America and she doesn't really identify with the miners or the Highland clans of her past. What better philosophy for a race of migrants than think for yourself? What better maxim for a people whose whole world was rudely inverted every 30 years or so than try new things? The more tradition-minded, the newly enthusiastic celebrants of Purim and Kwanzaa and Solstice may see little point to survival if their survivors carry no cultural freight. Religion, for example, or ethnic tradition. To which I would say that skepticism, curiosity, and wide-eyed ecumenical tolerance are also worthy elements of the human tradition and are at least as old as such notions as Serbian or Croatian, Scottish, or Jewish. So she's setting up another binary here, old versus new, or culture versus non-culture. She's also setting up the binary of modern history versus old history and what things are repeating and what things are not repeating. Okay. I make no claims for my personal line of progenitors except that they remained loyal to the values that may have induced all of our ancestors long, long ago to climb down from the trees and make their way into the open plains. A few weeks ago, I cleared my throat and asked the children, now mostly grown and fearsomely smart, whether they felt any stirrings of ethnic or religious identity, etc., which might have been insufficiently nourished at home. None, they said, adding firmly, and the world would be a better place if nobody else did either. My chest swelled with pride, as would my mother's, to know that the race of none marches on. So that's interesting. Completely different than the Martinez essay. Ehrenreich is kind of talking about culture in terms of humanist values. So that's another binary. She's going with humanist values, whereas Martinez is going for cultural and social values that need to be reset. So take a minute to think about how the two different authors talk about culture, how culture is presented to the next generation. Is it important to pass it down to the next generation? Why or why not? And then we're going to get into thinking about the tools that they used. For example, the Ehrenreich essay is very personal. It's first person. It talks about her children. Does Martinez talk about her family or her children? Not really. Okay, so why not? You know, keep asking those questions as you're comparing the two. All right, let's see what we have next on our list here. Okay, I'm going to stop this lecture and make sure it recorded correctly and do a part 2 of the lecture. So you'll have 2 links to watch. Okay, I'll see you soon.